Hey there YouTube, I'm Doc, Doc's Motorcycle Service. Rawr, rawr, rawr. Welcome to the garage. It's probably the middle of July and it's hot. God, it's hot. We're going to pick up on the wiring harness series. If you've been keeping up, you've noticed that this wiring harness series has been broken down, I think, into about 3 videos now. And there's probably going to be a 4th and a 5th and a 6th because the wiring of your motorcycle is very important. We're completely replacing the wiring harness on this bike. Well, not completely. We have replaced the dash wiring harness with a Pro 1 dash kit. We are meticulously working our way through all of the wires to make sure that they're good. We have installed new handlebar controls and new wiring harnesses in the handlebars. We're going to take off the old plugs and we're going to move this socket to the end of the new handlebar control wires. So this is the new Pro 1 dash kit, and it has a rear loom and a front loom, and the front loom goes down to the terminal block, and then there's another set of wires that bring the forward control wires back up for the right side and for the left side, and they plug into these wires for the left and right side of the handlebars once we get these new 8-pin connectors put on them. But what we're going to have to do first is look at old photos to determine where these sockets were in this area, so you have enough room for your handlebars to turn, but not so much wire that it gets bulky in here. Donna has a 2-piece tank on her, and this area in here is very limited. You will want to try to cut as much off of these wires as you can while still having enough slack once they're plugged in down here to move backwards and forth as the handlebars turn. So again, we're going to look at an old photo that we took when we took her apart, and I'll have that photo up here, but I believe that these sockets ended up somewhere about right here. So what we'll do is we'll run this down to about right here, and we'll probably cut about this much off of the wires to make them even. Our new pin connectors are not here yet. They're due here tomorrow. So what we're going to try to do today is get everything ready for those. We're going to trim these up, and then to make it easier on us, we're going to take the handlebars back off the bike and put them on the work table to make it easier to access. Now we're going to try to do something kind of cute. If anything can be considered cute with a Harley Davidson. If you go back and look at the other video where we used the steel braided weave to put around the front fender tip light and the clear plastic heat shrink to protect it, to make it look more uniform, we're also going to try some 3/8 steel weave to put around the 3/8 cable for the wiring harness on each side of the controllers. Instead of taking the steel braided weave and just sliding it over the wiring harness cable up to the bottom of the handlebars, we're going to remove the handles, which will give us about 3/4 of an inch to slide the clamshell in. We're then going to pull that 3/4 of an inch out on the bottom so we can run this all the way up to the bottom of the handlebars. My theory there is, once we do that and put the heat shrink on it, we'll then be able to pinch the wire down here, slide the clamshell back out, and let the steel braid disappear into the handlebar. I think it'll give it a nice, cleaner finish than just the steel braid stopping right there at the handlebars. So that's what we're up against. That's what we're going to try to do. As always, check out the Facebook page, leave a comment, share your project, ask a question, answer a question. Let's go get started. So basically what we did was just hand fit the tank back onto the frame so we could see where the tank would fit and how far the wiring harness would go behind it so we would know where to stop the steel braid. We then marked that with a Sharpie. Using the picture, we figured out about where our 8-pin connector needs to be at. So we've gone ahead and cut our wire. So now the next step is to get the clamshells moved in tighter, slide this out up here, run our steel braid on there, put the heat shrink on, and we'll be good to go. So we got our steel braid, and what we learned from the other instance of working with this stuff, one of the cool things that you can do with it is leave it in here and just pull it out sort of like weed eater line. It's easier to pull it out and manipulate it. We're going to need to have it at least from right here down to this bottom end, and we'll go a little further. So what we'll do is we'll take it and we'll put it to here, and we'll add about a 1/2 inch to it. We'll take a black Sharpie and mark where we want it at. One of the things that we learned in the first video was to be able to put a piece of heat shrink on this before we cut it. It keeps it from fraying up here at the beginning. I don't want to put heat shrink on it now because I'm afraid it'll collapse and mess it up. So what we're basically going to do is just take some black tape. One of the other things that we learned was to use a Dremel instead of a pair of pliers or cutters on this stuff because it's so tough. So now I'll use this to cut this in half right in the middle, and what that's going to do is that's going to allow this to go back in the tube until we need more of it without fraying, and this piece here will stay where we need it to without fraying until we get down there. Always use safety glasses when you're doing this. Now this is nice, ready for us to use. This can be put back into the holder without any worry of it fraying until we're ready to use it again. The plan is to put this steel braid on here, but this steel braid has no plastic on it, so it's very abrasive. If it rubs against chrome or it rubs against your painted finish, it's going to eat it up. But I've got a piece of clear 3/8 heat shrink. So the idea is that we'll open this up, slide it up here to where it needs to be at, then we'll cut this clear heat shrink to put over it to not only keep it where it needs to be at, but protect the finish on anything it might come in contact with. As a tech tip, don't run the clear heat shrink right to the end of the steel weave. That will allow it to become frayed on that end. I'm going to bring it in about 1/4 inch, and I'm going to cut it about 1/4 inch longer. I'm going to go ahead and open up this end and see if we can't work it up on here. Just going to have to play with it a little bit. Sometimes you can expand it a little bit in the middle right here to help you get it where it needs to go. Hey, look here, we're already coming out the end. That's kind of helpful because once you can get it down here and get it coming out the bottom, we have our black right here. Now we can probably, oh, look at there. Look how easy that went. Living and learning. Now, what we're going to do is put these pieces back down as straight as we can get it. Where was our mark at? Right there's our mark, so we know we need to be past that, or right at it. So we're going to put this right here. We're going to squeeze this back down, and we're going to thread our heat shrink up on it. Okay. So now we're going to just work this shrink up here. a little at a time. YouTube, it's a hot summer 2020. We got it done, but it wasn't easy. It was trial and error. And what we figured out to do was the first zip tie this one out of the way. But while we were trialing and erroring, we forgot to turn the, well, Linda forgot to turn the camera back on. No, that was just us. This we tried several ways to do this. So here's what we did. And then we're going to set the camera up to watch while we do it. And then we'll just time-lapse through it. But Linda came up with a great idea, because what was happening was with the steel braid sliding onto this packaged product protector, once we got the clear on there and started sliding it up, it didn't want to slide up on us. So Linda had the idea of taking some black heat shrink and replacing this with it. So we cut this off up here, being very careful, okay, very careful not to nip any of the wires. And then we took this black standard protective filming off and we replaced it with a 1/2 inch heat shrink. And then we shrunk that down, fed the steel braid weave into the clear heat shrink, and then slid both of them on there and then heated them up. So that's what we're going to do now. You ain't going to have to watch this whole process, because we're going to time lapse it. Then we just stripped it out. Knowing that we were going to push this up in here a little bit, we came down, marked it about right here, leaving about 1 inch or so on the bottom here. Well, maybe a little bit more than 1 inch. Put that up here, bring this down to right here. Alright, cut there, right there. Ran this up in here, and we squeezed it together right here where it enters the handlebars, just to make sure that it was up in there enough, and pulled on it, making sure all the ends are in this hole. And the purpose behind that is so when this shrinks down, it'll shrink down in the hole and protect this corner edge right here. And heated it up. On this thick stuff, you want to do it on both sides. Now, we're going to cut our piece of steel weave, and we're going to cut our piece of clear, feed that in, and just slowly work this up. And you just keep manipulating it until you get it up there where you want it. Once you get it close to the end, slide this down over it, taking your little pieces, putting them into the hole. Take your plastic. Once you get down here, as I said, make sure your little bristles are in. Slide this plastic up and then manipulate it in there as well. So we miscalculated this thing a little bit.
Shrinks.
Yes, Linda, I know it shrinks. But we need to get this up onto here to about right there, or right here at the edge of it. So what I want to do is, and I just want to make sure that I have enough room in here to manipulate this when I'm putting the ends on there. Again, be careful when you're cutting. Make sure that your edges are cut clean and flush. That way everything tightens down the way it should. Alright, so we're in up there. We're right here. Now we'll use the heat gun. Remember, don't burn your fingers. And try to keep the heat away from the one that you've already shrunk. There you go. Couple tips about heat shrinking. Remember, you've got your wires in here and you don't want to get them real hot. You're going to melt some stuff before you do it. So my suggestion is buy some of this cheap stuff, stick something cheaper in it, and then practice on it before you start working on the stuff that's important. They're looking fabulous. It's Thursday afternoon. The pin connectors are not due here till tomorrow, and I don't have a day off until Saturday. So we're going to let the pin connectors get here. I'm going to show you how I put one pin connector on, and then I'm going to put the rest of them on, and then we'll come back. This is the 8-pin connector that came off of the old Handlebar control wiring harness. This is the one for the right side that went up through the handlebars and eventually, before we cut it off, made contact with the right hand controllers. This is a part of the wiring harness on the bike that matches up with this 8-pin connector from the middle of the gas tanks, and I'll put a picture up here so you can see where this goes, and then it runs the length of the frame all the way back to the terminal block. I don't really want to have to rewire this and use 14 foot of wire and 7 connectors up here and 7 connectors back here if I don't have to. But I don't like how this green wire was patched one time before. So what I'm going to do is show you how to take an ohms meter, a 9-volt battery, and a couple of jumper cables to test the connectivity or the continuity of the wires. And if they all test good, then I'm going to leave all of this alone, except maybe trimming the edges up so we don't have a lot of excess wire when we get back to the terminal block. I have mine set at DCV, which is direct connect voltage, and I have it set at 20. So if you take your meter and you put it on the right sides, you're going to see that the battery is at 9.70. If we take this ohm meter and we put this battery with this cable to make a loop, and we're getting 9.70 volts through all of this, then these wires are in good shape. And the way we're going to do that is like this. We're going to put a jumper cable, a little jumper wire over here, and we're going to put it on, let's say, the brown one. Then we're going to take a jumper and we're going to run it from the negative side to the negative side of the ohm meter, and then we're going to take our positive and we're going to make contact. And as you can see, we got 9.70. All we have to do is work our way through each color of these wires. Like for example, we'll move over here and we'll go to the red one. Alright, then we'll come over here, we'll find the red one on this, and we'll go in and we'll make contact with it. 9.70. So what that's telling me is that the amperage or the volts coming out of this battery is 9.70, and when we put this cable between the battery and the meter, we get 9.70. So that tells me that we have good connectivity on that red wire. And all you got to do is just do this process for each one of the wires, but make sure that you're finding the color of the wire down here and going to it. What we're going to do is test this on both sets of these harnesses. Here's the one for the left side. And if we get the same amount of voltage on there, then we're in good shape. Now, looking at this one's been patched up, it's been chopped up, and it's been ate up. So I don't like the way that is, so we may in fact take the left hand side and try to replace that orange wire. But you say to yourself, well, what happens if you don't have 9.7 volts coming through the harness? What is a not so good amount of voltage coming through there? Well, I would say that if this has 9.7, and keep in mind, different batteries with different age, and wherever you steal this out of is going to be different. So get your baseline voltage out of the battery first. You may only have 5.2 coming out of the battery. So then you're going to expect 5.2 through here. But with this one at 9.70, if I was getting 9.67 or 9.68 or 9.69, I would say that's pretty good. If there was a large drop in voltage, like 8 point something or 7 point something, I would probably go ahead and look at replacing the wire in that. And in order to replace that, all we're going to end up doing is basically opening up this plastic and replacing the ends and replacing the wire. I would tell you that if you find yourself in a situation like with this green wire here, you can see this green wire, once this butt-end connector is removed, it's going to be a little bit shorter than the rest of them. But you know what? It may come in close to the terminal block and you might not have to worry about lengthening that wire. Take these old wires out of the two connectors, and utilizing the new pin connectors we got, move the connector housing to the new wires after we put these new ends on. I'm going to show you how to do that. And pin connectors are called male and female, and it should be obvious. This is a male. It's round and it's closed up. This is a female. It's round and open-ended. And basically all they do is slide together. But where it gets hinky is taking these pin connectors out of this housing. Some of these, because they're worn out, will just pull out. But if you can see on the male connector, if this one was brand new, and you may be able to see it, this little piece right here at one time stuck out, just like this little piece right here. And Linda is doing her best to let you be able to see this. But the idea is it comes formed, stuck out like that, so that when you press it in here, this thing presses through a slot, comes down, and then pops back out. There's one right here that will not pull out because that little jagged edge, after it comes through that hole, pops back out. Alright? So to get these things out, what you have to do is to go in there with a really small flat screwdriver or a pick or something and press that piece in while pulling it slightly from the back. And I hate you can't see this, but I can't show you and see it at the same time. But once you get it manipulated enough, it'll start to slide out, and then you bring it out the back side. I'm going to put it back in there for now, just so I know where these colors go. And when we put the new one in, all you have to do is slide it up in there until you feel a little, it'll get kind of tough going in, and then you'll feel a little click, and it'll be right there where it is. And the purpose of that is, when you put the two of them together, the wires do not push out the back. There's a couple ways you can do this. You can buy these pin connectors, and you can buy the ratchet pliers that go with them, that when you get your wire in place, your crimper, you put it on there and it crimps these little tabs. By looking at the white one and comparing it to these, you'll see that the insulation has been stripped off of this about 3/16, an eighth of an inch to 3/16. Then the insulation is left here. And with the fancy crimping tool that you can buy for like $130 to do this with, you put your new connector in there, you put your new wire in there, and then you come in and you squeeze it And what it does is, instead of laying these tabs over from each side, it rolls them in on themselves, sort of like a staple. Alright, I'm not paying that kind of money for that. And I fancy myself a pretty good solderer. Solder that in here to hold it in place. Keep in mind that I'm going to end up taking this molding tab off here, but I left it on here so you can see it without me having to cover my fingers up. Then I'm going to take a pair of needle nose pliers and I'm going to fold that one over that one. I'm going to fold that one over that one. And then I'm going to fold this one over the insulation and that one over the insulation, and I'm going to call it good. Now, soldering is going to require you to have a soldering gun, which gets hot. Hot, hot, hot. The soldering iron that I use gets up to 674 degrees. And you're like, oh my God, why you use one so big? Well, I solder circuit boards as well. And I'm going to show you how I solder one of these joints. And this is not going to be a class on soldering. If you want to learn how to solder, there's a lot of videos on YouTube with a lot of recommendations on how to do it. But I will first tin it by putting a little solder on the connector, and then I will put a little solder on the wire. The trick there to tinning is that if you have two joints that are already soldered together, when you put them together and hit heat with them, the solder from both joints will flow together quickly and make a good solid connection. But if you're going to solder, have some safety glasses, have a fire extinguisher nearby, and don't send me hate mail if you burn your finger. There's an old saying, measure twice, cut once. So be good at something before you start to work on the actual thing. We got our pin connector in the extra hands, or whatever people call them, and I'm trying to keep this thing at an angle where you can see it and where I can see it at the same time. We're going to take our soldering gun and we're going to add some solder to it until we can get a nice little blob on the bottom, and then we're going to lay that in there on the connectors. Now, it might go down as a blob, and if it does, that's okay. You just come back like I did right there while it's hot, and you smooth it out. I call it lapping it out, like smoothing concrete to get it in there. Now I'm going to take that out after it's cooled. After it's cooled, I'm going to put my wire in there. For the purposes of videoing this, we had to put a piece of paper behind it because the camera kept wanting to focus on the carpet. So now we're going to do the same thing. So now we're going to put this on here. I'm going to try to put it on there so you can see the blob. See how there's a blob on the bottom? Then we're going to lay it on it. The wire is tinned. This is tinned. We're going to let this cool for a minute. Ensure that this second set of clips is going to lay down on the insulated wire. Get it hot. Lap it in there. There you go. As you can see, these tabs will lay down on the insulation, and this one's full, so this one's not going to crimp as tight as you might want it to because it's full of solder, but that's a solid joint. If you come in here and you start prying on it too much, you could crack the solder and mess up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to take one side of the tab and I'm going to gently collapse it over like that. Then I'm going to come in here with the needle nose and I'm going to collapse it over and give it a good squeeze. Got a nice joint. Of course, this piece right here would be cut off, but we got a nice solder joint there. I mean, it's in there. That's how you solder your pin connector. I'm going to go ahead and take care of the other ones. The connectors that I ordered online came as a 50-piece set. That was 25 males, 25 females. Always get more than you need if you've never done this before, or if you're not going to buy the $150 tool. I only need 14 male connectors, but I got 25. Well, I went ahead and got some female connectors too, because once I get into the rest of this stuff, before I tested it, I might have needed some extra ones. So we're going to get at this and we'll be back. And there you go. So it's hot in the garage. We're wrapping this thing up. I ain't gonna lie to you, I moved the operation into the house where there was some AC at, just to make it a little bit more pleasant. But as you can see from the photographs now that they're popping up, we got the steel braid in there. It looks great. Very happy with the way that turned out, the way it tucked up into the bottom of the handlebars. You know, from a customizing point of view, it gives the illusion that the steel braid is going on up into the handlebar, and that's what you want. You want people to look at this stuff. You know, when you're doing stuff like this, it's the little things that make a difference on something. Anybody who knows motorcycles, works on motorcycles, owns motorcycles, have done their own work on motorcycles, does this for a living, when they come walking up to a motorcycle, they're looking at the entire picture of it. They're taking in the whole thing, but as they get up to it, then they're going to start to notice little details about it. And you're going to glean information from other people's projects about what may or may not look good on yours, what you may or may not want to do to yours. Got the new pins on the wires, got them soldered in, got them pinched over. I'll show you a couple pictures of those. New sockets are on. Everything looks great. And here's a little tech tip. Remember in the video how I showed you how we use the 9-volt battery and the ohms meter to test the return looms up, make sure that we had good connectivity from one end of the connector to the other one, so we wouldn't have to replace that. Well, once these were on, I did the exact same thing. Looked at the wiring diagram, ran the power to one side, the inside, ran the jumper wire to the other side, put the ohms meter in there in the beginning, hit the turn signal buttons, hit the high and low beam, start, run button, horn button, meter lit right up, so we know that everything is as it should be in there and there should not be any shorts. So confident in that. So before I forget, check out the Facebook page. Always a good time there. Rate, comment, subscribe, like it, and you know, while you're watching these videos, if you would, let them advertisements play out a little bit. Don't make a whole lot of money off of this, but you know, it's a nice little income for parts that Linda doesn't know about. She's not here right now. But you know, it helps pay for some stuff around the garage that I use to help put these videos up to you. So watch the, don't immediately close out the advertisements, let them play out for just a little bit. So with that said, the bars are now ready to go back on Donna. We got her ready to go, and heard from the chromer, got a call from them, and they said that everything should be ready to be picked up by this Wednesday. So we're going to kick this into high gear. So as always, appreciate you coming by the garage. Thanks for the support. Thanks for watching the video. Hoped it helped you with your project. Drop a comment, visit the Facebook page, and take care. See you later, YouTube. And cut!